I finally talk about Anthony Jeselnik and Marc Maron.
Yeah, I think that's all the promotion.
Thank you.
One more for David Collins. Well,
right,
David Collins on Wednesday.
All right, yeah. Now, Anthony Jeselnik is doing a media tour, and he finally, there's a guy that has been waiting for this, who's rubbing his hands together. Marc Maron has been sitting in his garage saying, "Yes, Anthony, come into my web. Finally, we can take down Rogan." He's very excited. For some reason, Anthony Jeselnik has decided to make his entire press tour promoting his Netflix special about dumping on Joe Rogan. I guess that is because we can't play the clip, but there is a joke from the special where he talks about Joe Rogan. And it's interesting because he talks about how much he likes Joe Rogan. He's like, Joe's a friend of mine. But if you listen to his podcast, you're an idiot. And then he goes on to explain someone in his life who's a conspiracy theorist and what a moron that guy is. And so he talks about Rogan in the special, which is, I guess, why he's taken this angle. Also, I think Anthony Jeselnik bashes Joe Rogan is probably good for his algorithm. It gets people, idiots like us, talking about Anthony Jeselnik, and people say, what is Anthony Jeselnik up to? And then they go to his special. So I think Jeselnik is a very funny comedian, and I even think he makes some fair points among all the bullshit that he's going through in all these interviews. The reason I'm so fascinated by this is because Anthony Jeselnik is talking about how Joe Rogan and the Comedy Mothership and the Rogan crew is essentially the downfall of comedy. And yet, he has been on 4 podcasts that I've heard, I'm sure many more, but he's been on at least 4 different podcasts talking about how terrible Joe Rogan is. You know what Joe Rogan has said about Anthony Jeselnik? Fucking nothing. Not a word. No one cares. And it's weird to me because like Maron and Jeselnik seem to have this belief that the only acceptable comedy now is Joe Rogan. I don't know if you've seen the feedback on Rogan's special. People roundly trashed it. I got trashed because I said I thought it was fine. I thought it was okay. And people were like, you're a fucking idiot. You don't know anything. It was terrible. So people only talked about how bad Rogan's special was. Also, if you look at who's successful in comedy, I don't people like Rory Scovel, Maron and Jeselnik would be 2 examples. But there's tons of examples of guys who don't fit whatever the mold of a Rogan comic would be that are doing very well. Even if you look at guests on Kill Tony, Rick Glassman was on last week. Not a Rogan. I don't think he's ever been on Rogan, but even just politically, not a Rogan guy at all. Doesn't fit that mold. He's completely different and weird and unique. And he was on Kill Tony last week and seemed like he had a fine time. You can step into the Comedy Mothership and be now. Is there an element of people like Jeselnik and Maron looking down their nose at the mothership, which is why it might lack some diversity of thought there? Probably, because they're the elitists who think they're better than. And that's what's so interesting to me. Also, a character going on a podcast tour and having serious discussions about how Joe Rogan shouldn't be having serious discussions is fascinating to me. So, now that I've set all that up, I feel like for all the comments that are like, you're just sucking Rogan's dick, you hate Anthony Jeselnik, you're a Republican, I think I've laid it all out pretty well. So I guarantee we won't get any of those comments this week. Now, let's get into WTF with Marc Maron featuring Anthony Jeselnik.
Yes, and I have a theory about this Jeselnik character that we're watching go here. But also, this was a Spotify you sent me to, Mike. So I did add some just AI Marc Maron videos. So that's what you're watching.
Oh, goody. All right.
First one called Anyone Can Do It.
Oh, yeah. So this is interesting. That this is their gripe with comedy these days, I guess. And apparently it's different than it used to be. I think this is actually a good thing, but it's interesting to hear their take on
it. Personal.
I do a little of that myself.
See it. Yeah.
I got that. I don't know if have you seen the new special?
Yes.
The Norm story is me dealing with that.
Right.
Getting to meet my hero and work with him and having it be a disaster was that. Let me fix this. Or Thoughts and Prayers, talking about my Comedy Central show failing. It was getting that off my chest.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's how can I help comedy?
Yeah, dude. I'm fucking going out there now, and I'm like, who are these people now?
I don't know anybody. And when I do hear something, it's not good. Like, I'm like, I need to stop looking at the internet. I'm
What
not
you
really
mean?
on social
You mean
media.
like other comics or just people?
Other comics.
Well, anyone can do it. Anyone can do it now.
Well, now it's podcast.
Hold on. Now, like, Anthony's going to get into it. Anthony's going to go on another podcast and talk about how terrible podcasts are. But first, Maron's like, now anyone can do it. When Maron came up in the 80s, were there people at open mics being like, no, you got to joke about trans people? Like, is that how it used to be? Because it's not like that now. Is that Maron's issue that there aren't more gatekeepers? Like, anyone could have done comedy in 1986 if they wanted to. Actually, it's interesting because back then, no one gave a fuck about stand-up, really. People wanted to be actors or musicians or on Broadway. Like, their other art forms were much more popular than stand-up. So literally anyone could do it. Fucking Freddie Prinze got famous off of 5 minutes on Carson. Like, you're telling me that's not an example of anyone can do it? But now that's different? I actually think it's different now because there's so much horseshit out there. I don't know. I wonder if Maron's aware of who Tom Myers is. Actually, I do know he's aware of Dan Ninen. And it's like, do you think the feedback on a guy like Dan Ninen is positive? Like, people are just delusionally like, hey, just anyone saying words up there on a stage is great. Again, I actually recommend Maron start going to like podcast cringe on YouTube because I actually think he'd enjoy it. The feedback on people like Rogan is not all positive. So this idea like anyone can do it. Yep, anyone can do it and anyone can get shit on for it, which actually makes it much more horrifying than it was in 1985.
Yeah, just scroll through your YouTube feed. YouTube serves up some 30 view shows every once in a while. Just take a gander.
Yeah. Well, like I get a lot of like when we talk about D'Elia or Brendan Schaub, like they're kind of easy to rip on. And I still get comments like, oh, you're just jealous of them. That's why you're talking about them. So it's like everyone has defenders and everyone has like people who shit on them. You know, like that's the internet. It's actually worse to do it now because even someone like you said with 30 views can get some form of negative attention.
Yeah, that's the only attention that you can
Right.
really get with that. That's
Right.
It's not
Dude.
so much being a comic as it is being a podcaster who does live
I
appearances.
feel like I unleashed an evil on the world.
But yours is different. I mean,
Yeah.
yours.
Oh, this one's different. Yeah, it's so different of Mark. You know what Mark did? Is he has a comedy guest on and he talks to them for an hour just about like whatever, their career, the business, whatever. And that's so different than every other comedy podcast. No one was like, now I actually like Maron a lot. And here's the other thing is like, if you criticize Maron, people are like, you're jealous of him or whatever. I think Maron's a terrific interviewer. There's even moments in this, like once they get away from this, like just bitching about the industry, like there's moments of Maron being a great interviewer. I think Maron is great at this and is one of the first guys to be like, hey, let's just sit down and talk about the comedy business and more so my problems. And like Maron was an originator of that. But the idea that like he's the only one is silly. For Jeselnik to go, oh, well, you're the one acceptable podcast. That's so crazy. I don't think I even need to rebut it. Like anyone listening would know that that's an insane thought to be like the WTF podcast is a solely different vehicle than anything else on YouTube right now or anywhere else.
He's Aaron Imholting us. Oh, I've been in radio 30 years. You wouldn't understand. He's doing that thing where he's like, he's a tower, we're a tiny house. We can never
Right.
be him.
Right.
But I feel like it's different than these other podcasts.
How's it doing?
Terrible. We have no guests, no engagement.
Wait. I thought anyone could do it. I thought it was so easy for any asshole to turn on a microphone that someone of Anthony Jeselnik's stature should have 40 million views every episode, right? Like, can't anyone do it now? So why are you doing terrible, Anthony? Oh, I know. Anthony's doing bad numbers on his podcast because he's so dedicated to the craft.
Mhm.
Damn his artistic integrity. It's costing him.
Yeah, us too.
Poor
Us
guy.
too, right, Electra? Yeah, we're dedicated to the craft. That's why our numbers are
Yeah,
so low, right,
yeah.
Electra? Say yes, yes, dedicated to the
Yes,
craft.
definitely.
Who listens to it? We have we do make money, but it's not like,
Yeah.
oh, we got a good new guest. They
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
telling us if you got guests, this would be huge.
It'd be
So, like, Tim Dillon, who really doesn't have guests that often, like, Tim Dillon just sits there and rants and does massive numbers. He has guests once in a while, but for the most part, sits there, talks to himself, does massive numbers. Had the biggest show on Patreon at one time. I don't know if it's still number one, but pretty big either way. So, like, I think Anthony seems like bitter that he hasn't mastered podcasting, but also saying podcasting is a terrible thing that you should never get into. It's funny how that works.
Yes. This next one is called Self-Important.
Okay. I am a little worried about these clips. Spotify fucks up the timing sometimes, so I hope we have everything. But
Okay, yeah, I went to Spotify and I screenshotted the exact numbers.
I know
that.
that's what I'm worried about. I should have asked
no.
before because Spotify fucks shit up. But
Well, you're so good. You can discuss anything that they're talking about. So even if it's off
oh
topic.
come on, Casey, get out of here.
Bull
there was a
baby.
time, like it all of a sudden, like everybody has just figured out that, like, well, I can sit there and talk, and now we have like just thousands of blathering white guys. It's like
Hold
the
on.
zeitgeist has
What
just
I
become
don't see
afternoon.
very well. As you guys know, this is the Blind Mike Project. My eyes don't work too well. What are the races of the two gentlemen speaking, Marc Maron and Anthony Jeselnik?
I think Eskimo. I'm blind. I can't see.
Okay, good. Because they sure as shit better not be white. That would be devastating to this conversation if Marc Maron was like, all podcasts are now, except for mine, are two white guys just blathering about nothing. Anyways, back to the clip of the Marc Maron podcast.
Yeah, Jeselnik, a classic sub-Saharan African name.
Okay, good.
Drive time radio.
It's as if podcasters, and comedy podcasters, figured out the algorithm. Like if you go conspiracy theory,
Right.
you're getting a whole new fan base. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you play devil's advocate
Yeah.
when it comes to politics,
Yeah.
you're getting that fan base,
Yeah.
and they've just clicked into that.
Well,
I'm not.
I'll say yes, except for the people who aren't. Except for the massive amounts of shit on YouTube or Spotify or wherever that try that and fail. Like, you're discounting the thousands of people that are bad at it and no one ever latches onto it. What Anthony should be saying is people who figured out the algorithm and put on a show that people are interested in have an edge over whatever the
Yes.
Jeselnik and Rosenthal vanity project is. Like, I don't listen to Andrew Schultz's podcast. It just doesn't interest me. It seems to interest a lot of people. We've pulled clips from it when it does interest me. Like, there's certain things that Andrew touches on that pique my interest. But for the most part, I don't really give a shit. So what I do is not watch. And there are millions of people, apparently, that disagree with me, and they watch every week. So either those people are under some spell that Andrew Schultz has cast upon them, or Andrew Schultz does a show that isn't for me, but is for other people. And Anthony Jeselnik, it seems like, probably doesn't watch Andrew Schultz's show. So that's me and Anthony Jeselnik. That's at least two of us have had the freedom of thought enough to say, I don't feel like listening to that. And yet, somehow, Andrew Schultz has made a living, despite the fact that we are allowed to not watch those podcasts. So again, what it seems like is just bitter jealousy that these guys are angry that Tony Hinchcliffe and Andrew Schultz, who they don't like, are successful.
Yeah, it's 100% bitterness. I was sort of on Jeselnik's side in the previous weeks, and then I kind of put everything together, what he's been saying. And to me, it's just like he's saying, I do a particular magic trick. Everyone should be paying attention and focused to the way I do magic. Don't look at the fucking 3-ring circus behind you that everyone wants to go to. I mean, that's what he's basically saying. He just discovered the conspiracy theories and arguing on the internet gets you views. What are you talking about, dude? You're just upset, like we were, that when you make original shit, people don't come. Because it just accept it. It's a reality and move on. You can't change it, Jeselnik. And that's my Jeselnik.
It's also funny to me that Jeselnik's gripe, because like you said, I listen to Jeselnik, and there are times where I'm like, that's a fair point. Like when he talked about Tony Hinchcliffe, like the ego on Tony Hinchcliffe. I was like, that's a fair point. And if you talk about certain guys just saying trans, like just bringing up trans, because it's an edgy topic, quote unquote.
Right.
So it's like I'll just make a joke about that. Like that's fair, somewhat. So there are moments where he makes good points, but what is crazy to me is to say that Joe Rogan is essentially an asshole for having serious conversations on a podcast. You're saying you're not a comedian, you're a podcaster, because what you do is have serious conversations on a podcast. Right, Marc Maron? Let's discuss this seriously on a podcast. To me, that's crazy hypocritical. And it's bizarre that he doesn't see that or acknowledge it. It's almost to the point where you're like, Anthony Jeselnik must be doing a bit, because to have a serious conversation on a podcast about how you're not a comic, if you have serious conversations on a podcast, it seems too meta to even to be real.
I think he's trying to leave the door open so he can always say it was a bit in a character, while also trying to shove through some of these ideas. You remember when he said, it's not real comedy unless you get away with it, right? Like, and I kind of understood what he was saying. Like, you kind of need to be able to say the horrible thing, but not have people think you're a horrible person. But then I realized his comedy has no skin in the game. It's fake situations, fake outrage.
Right.
And
it's,
so
it's very edgy to talk about how, something to do with pedophilia about the lady next door until you realize the lady next door doesn't exist. Not only is she not a pedophile, she's not real. So it's edgy to touch on those topics, but there's no substance behind it.
He's created a system where he's always right. He's like, well, I have no skin in the game, but I got away with it. And the way you're an artist is get away with it. Hey, I did it, guys. Look at me. I mean, it's kind of pathetic. Where these guys are taking risks like Joe Rogan and, these other Theo Vaughn, these other comedians. I don't always agree with what they're saying, and most of the time you strike out, but, that's professional baseball, baby. You 300's a Hall of Famer.
And again, I like Jeselnik. I'm not saying that like you said, magic trick that he does, and I think it's actually very impressive, that essentially he gives you like 8 seconds to guess the punchline that he's telling. Like with his pauses, it's crazy. He's basically daring you to guess, to ruin the joke and guess what he's going to say, and you still don't know what he's going to say. He still surprises you. Like that's very impressive to me. But it's also, if you're going to be the arbiter of comedy and say, well, that's the only way to do it, you're just wrong. Like I think he looks down at guys like Ari Shaffir because he's an edgelord. But if you look at what Ari's doing versus what Anthony's doing, Ari is without a doubt more edgy, quote unquote. Like if that's what you're weighing things off of, Ari is actually a more dangerous comedian, for whatever that's worth, than Anthony Jeselnik pretends to be.
Jeselnik might be one of the safest comedians on the planet. That's what I've discovered. Like his,
of course, because people can go, "Ooh, I'm naughty."
Yeah,
I'm laughing at something naughty, but it's not. But you're not actually offending anyone.
Gaffigan is more offensive in real life. You're like,
right.
I'm not
there's someone that enjoys Hot Pockets that he's offending.
Exactly.
I'm not that calculating. But whenever I flip around those podcasts, it's always like 3 dudes. Most of the time we know at least 2 of them just sitting around going like, when was the first time you shit your pants as an adult?
Yeah.
See, we have a lady with us, Mike.
Yeah, that's totally not. But again, I don't know what he's talking about. Because even if he's talking about like Legion of Skanks, or like they do some of that, I guess, but also then they don't. You know what I mean? So you're marginalizing these people. And by the way, like Maron came up, like he was on Tough Crowd a bunch. He was friends with like those guys. Is that different than that crew of guys like trying to be shocking and edgy? The group that's trying to be shocking and edgy now? Is it that different from 20 years ago? I really don't think so. Like Maron's trying to get you to believe it's doomsday, that everything's falling apart. But it's really not that different than it ever has been. Fucking Dice was popular 40 years ago. Like this is all, it's the same type of shit.
It's a little generational bias going on here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's an hour.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done all those and I can't stand it anymore. Because it's become like self-important that now I'm doing this. I'm doing like I did Tom Papa's podcast.
He's a nice guy.
I'm gonna do Kimmel, and that's it.
Oh, you know what? don't do self-important horse shit. Do Jimmy Kimmel instead. He goes on to he trashes like Bad Friends. He's for some reason he goes out. He's like, I like Santino, I like Bobby Lee, but like I'm not going on their podcast to having them fuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like. I used to listen to Bad Friends. I haven't in a long time. Is that what they do? Is have Anthony Jeselnik on to fuck with him? Is that really the vibe? So there might be some weird thing where Jeselnik feels like out of mainstream comedy, like not accepted by those guys. But again, like, who would be the first person to invite Jeselnik on would be Joe Rogan. He's done it before. Jeselnik has done his show. And then Jeselnik says, like, I'm not going to do that show anymore. I'm above it. So it's like, you're the one being self-important. Like, it's amazing to me that he's using these words. He's like, oh, all these shows seem so self-important to me. I will go on a press tour criticizing a guy, and also I'll sprinkle in that I will never do his podcast again. So he can't confront me publicly about it.
I think Jeselnik's one of those guys that finds market inefficiencies. And since like comedy has been like evacuated by liberals essentially, I think he sees kind of a space where he can come in and just sort of like lightly pepper these guys with jabs and sort of, you know, round up Hal Sparks' audience maybe. I don't know.
I don't think that's true, by the way. The idea that it's been left. But like, you tell me John Mulaney isn't massively popular? He's a liberal guy. Or like...
the audience more than the
well, whose fault is that?
Theirs.
Right. That's not Joe Rogan or anyone. That's not Tony Hinchcliffe's fault.
I lost 300 Twitter followers because these assholes can't take jokes.
That's people for years. Here's an example. I don't know if the audience, throw a name in the chat if you can think of anyone that did this. The reason that maybe liberals aren't in comedy audiences anymore is because we spent about a decade criticizing the likes of Shane Gillis. And when Shane Gillis tried to get SNL, we said that he was an edgelord loser who would never make it in comedy. Who's someone that said something like that? I can't think. There's an episode of Why You Laughing where you can check. I don't know if Anthony Jeselnik knows anyone like that would go out of his way to bash a nobody comic before his career started in the name of political correctness, essentially. So that might be why the predominant voice in comedy is a guy like Rogan, who has championed free speech. And does Rogan make dumb political points on his show? Of course. He's a pothead comedian who comments on jujitsu, who you're turning to for political news.
Believes in dragons, Mike.
He believes in dragons. Now, I don't know what more Joe Rogan has to do, because he's gone on both his podcast and his Netflix special and said, you should not listen to me. Don't come to me for medical advice. I'm going to continue talking about this stuff because it interests me. But don't listen to me. Don't do whatever I say blindly. I don't know what more responsibility Joe Rogan has other than that. He's said it. He's been upfront with it. Does he think he's smarter than he is? Probably. So does Anthony Jeselnik, it seems.
So do I.
So does everyone. So do most people. The reason I'm confident enough to pontificate into a microphone like this is because I probably think I'm smarter than I am. Most people will call me an idiot in the comments, but I don't believe that. So, like, in order to do this, you kind of need to think you're smarter or more important than you are in some way. So I don't get the idea of like blaming Joe Rogan for people listening to his podcast. And Anthony can hide behind the fact, no, I said I like Joe Rogan. I just blame the idiots who listen to him. Okay, well, we know what you're doing. That's not a compliment to Joe, you know?
This next one's called Opie and Anthony, or O&A. I'm assuming that's what that stands for.
O&A, yes, you're correct. Maron was a frequent guest on Opie and Anthony. Never seemed to have a problem with it. This is bizarre. I looked for this clip that Anthony's talking about. Was not able to find it. If anyone can, you guys know I'm an O&A historian of sorts. We've done episodes about it, so send it my way if you can find Anthony Jeselnik's first appearance. I couldn't find evidence of this anywhere, but this is Jeselnik talking about when he was on O&A.
Like I don't want to do the rounds. I like Bobby Lee. I like Andrew Santino.
Oh, yeah,
I don't want
funny.
to put up with bad friends.
Yeah.
I don't want to go in there and do that.
Yeah.
That I'm trying to avoid it.
Because you don't know what's going to happen?
I kind of know what's going to happen. I know they're just going to try to annoy me.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to get annoyed. And that's
Why? Jeselnik has done Andrew's podcast before, and it seemed like a perfectly fine time. This is now I'm aware, like, maybe it's a character, because why would he be saying that about guys he likes? That's weird to me. So maybe there is a bit of a character I'm missing, because that seemed out of nowhere. That made no sense to me.
That annoys him, but you can date Amy Schumer. Get out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
Well, it was many years ago.
Still, that's probably why he's still annoyed. Still,
It can be funny, me being, pissed off at someone.
Yeah.
But if I'm like building a press tour?
Oh, you mean
no? I can leave that.
They're
Off.
going to try to get you worked up?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I remember just back in the day in New York where, I do Opie and Anthony occasionally, but you just didn't know what you were going to be part of.
Yeah.
That's a different thing. Like, am I going to be part of some racist excursion?
Oh, I remember doing Opie
Really,
and
Mark?
Anthony
Because he
back
kept
in the-
coming back all the way to the end. Like, Mark was on. So, I mean, he wasn't like Colin Quinn or Patrice or any of these guys, but he was on somewhat regularly. Like, I don't get this. There was even a thing where Maron had to apologize. He felt bad because Howard instituted a rule where you couldn't do Stern the same day or the same week you did O&A. And I remember Maron it came up because Maron did that. And he had to cancel on Opie and Anthony and felt very bad about it. But Mark, you kept doing. You're an adult. Why would you keep doing this horribly racist? Why would you walk into this den of horrors if you knew what it was? That's crazy to me.
times were different back then, Mike.
I suppose.
Bitcoin was $1,000.
Those are the
in the day.
Oh my God. Can you imagine?
And it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
It was like, you got to get on there.
You'd be part of the guys, one of the guys.
I remember I was doing a weekend at Caroline's and they had it on the list. And I get there at 7 in the morning.
Right.
Drink a big coffee. And, and an intern meets me. He's shaking. And he's like, I'm so sorry. They don't have time for you today.
Hold on. I like all the imagery, by the way. I drink a big coffee as if that matters for some reason. Oh my God, Anthony, your poor stomach. How did you do that?
Let me paint a picture for you, Mike. I was drinking coffee.
Oh my God, your bladder, Anthony. What if you had to pee during the show? Had you thought of that, Anthony? The consequences. And then he's like, an intern was shaking. He's painting this picture that seems like, oh my God, Mr. Jeselnik, I'm so terribly sorry. Opie and Anthony are too busy being racist to have you on.
They can't have you on. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I realize now they were fucking with me. They were like, fuck this guy. He thinks he's so great.
Right.
Let's
While
have him
that
show
might
up here
seem
at 7 a.m. and
crazy,
tell him-
I'll defend him because Opie does have a history of doing that. Just Opie, though, not Cumia or Norton. That was an Opie thing. So I'll defend him there. That's possible. Again, probably in his own head, but possible.
No.
Yeah.
And then I still went, but it was.
Oh,
So
shit,
that's
yeah.
what
And Spotify fucks this up. God damn you, Spotify. Well, so he goes on to say that the first question they asked him was, do you ever use the N-word? And he goes, I thought it was a joke. I thought they were trying to trick me. I was like, no. And he goes, and then the rest of the interview was really weird and uncomfortable.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And I'm like, Anthony, it seems like a lot of this is in your own head. I've listened to a lot of Opie and Anthony. You can criticize them for a lot, believe me. They were not the most tactful in a lot of ways. There's plenty to go look at Anthony Cumia's Twitter. There's plenty to mock and criticize. But the idea that they weren't welcoming to comedians is crazy. And that's completely in Anthony's own head. Again, maybe you guys can prove me wrong. Find the video. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure it's easy enough to find. I just wasn't able to. If you can find Anthony Jeselnik's first appearance on Opie and Anthony, send it to me. Because maybe I'm wrong, but I would find it hard to believe that he just walks in. They go, you say the N-word? He goes, no. And they're like, fucking asshole. And they just ignore him the rest of the interview. I find that hard to believe, but it's possible.
This next one is called The Rogan Empire.
Okay. So yeah, this is what they're really jealous about. This is what brought these two minds together today and why Maron was so giddy to get Jeselnik on. It's to trash this guy.
Later when I was doing Caroline's and did it again.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the first question they asked me is,
Oh, wait.
do you ever use
here it
the
is.
N-word
That's weird.
on stage?
Yeah.
And I go, no. Thinking it was a trick question. I'm like,
Yeah.
no. And then the interview shut down where they were like, oh, this guy's no fun. And 10 minutes later, they're like, all right, you can get out of here now. And I'm like, why is this so popular? Why is this the thing?
You can get out of
Those
here now.
people, the evolution of those people are now what is taken over.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I'm having a difficult time because, I drew a line, between, I've been calling out the sort of Rogan empire as some sort of tribal leadership problem, and then
I
they're
will give Maron this. It's crazy what he's saying, but I will give Maron this. Maron has been bitching like this about Rogan for virtually no one. Like, we found him on his Instagram lives doing it. He does it like embedded in this audio podcast that people would have to seek out to find, people like me or my buddy Lieutenant Kirk. So like Maron has kind of been doing it not for attention. He believes that, for better or worse, he believes Rogan is the death of society. Jeselnik is doing something much grosser, I feel, and doing it for attention.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing it so, and we're giving it to him, I guess. Not that this is a massive podcast, but we are playing into what he wants. Like, he wants people to talk about his special, so he's bashing Rogan. And that to me is way grosser than what Maron is doing. More calculated and logical. Like, I can understand it more. Maron seems to think that, like, this is the downfall of society. Listen, I'm sure there's a little more. Listen to how Maron describes this.
And I'm not putting you in a position to speak to this, but now it's just like some sort of full-on bootlicking going on and facilitation of what is going to be the fucking end of everything. And like, I drew that, I publicly wrote a piece.
Oh yeah.
And I was relatively diplomatic, but after a certain point, someone's got to go like, this is what's happening. It's not just comedy anymore.
What?
Right?
What is what's happening? Andrew Schultz and Tony Hinchcliffe are playing arenas? That's going to be the downfall of society? Like, really, Mark? That's what you're so worried about? That society is going to come crumbling down because a guy who makes Puerto Rico jokes is playing big venues? Like, that can't possibly be a political issue worth writing an article about and worth yelling to your followers like, we're all going to die. Mark's calling for a civil war because the mothership is sold out every night. Like, that's crazy to me. That can't possibly. And again, it would be indicative of something bigger if Tony Hinchcliffe was massively successful, but Jim Gaffigan was in poverty. You know what I mean? Like, if Jim Gaffigan suddenly started getting more political and goes on SNL and plays Tim Walz and all that stuff, and all of a sudden Jim Gaffigan was starving, that would be worrisome for society. Because then, yes, it would be like, oh, you have to have this one line of thinking. Like, if Patton Oswalt was spotted in a soup kitchen, that would be troublesome. You know what I mean? But Marc Maron has a special on HBO. Anthony Jeselnik has a special on Netflix. These guys are still getting things. And that's what makes the bitching really insane, is like, so what you're mad about is essentially freedom of thought, where there's a world where Joe Rogan and Marc Maron can both be popular. That's what you're upset about? Because Joe Rogan is more popular and got $200 million from Spotify? I don't know, Mark. Mark brags in this, I don't know if we have it or not, but Mark brags about not being on YouTube. He's like, yeah, man, this is just different. I don't give in to that kind of stuff. This is just different, man. It's like, okay, Mark. Well, maybe you could have gotten $100 million from Spotify if your podcast was out there more and getting the exclusive rights to it meant something 4 years ago. And then maybe you could have got another deal when they realized, oh, you know what? Maybe it's better to just have essentially the licensing rights and still get the ad money from YouTube and all these other platforms. Maybe if you weren't so fucking hip and punk rock. Anthony actually says that in this interview, by the way. Anthony calls himself a punk rocker.
Oh no.
Anthony, you're on Netflix. I'm sorry to tell you. The reason I know you is because you've been on Comedy Central and Netflix. I don't know how punk rock that is, Anthony. But maybe if you guys weren't so fucking cool, man, then you would have all the things you're jealous of. Maybe that's possible.
And just a reminder, we're 5 minutes into the interview with two of the comic legends of our lifetime, and we haven't even breathed through our nose once, Mike. What's going on here? Are they comedians or not?
Right?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you 100%. You used a lot of words I did not understand in the op-ed piece, but I agree with you. I think they've been seduced. I think that whole crew has been seduced
By power?
Yes.
Seduced by power, the power
Guys.
of laughter.
Watch Saturday Night Live sometime. Just throw on SNL once. I mean, what the fuck are you talking about?
The dark side.
Now, again, I'll grant you, like, if Rogan starts changing his comedy or his which I watched a video from Kyle Kalinske the other day. I don't know if that's a guy who's snapped or not. I know Rogan used to have him on, and evidently now he doesn't, because this Kyle I think I'm saying it right, Kyle Kalinske, made a video just trashing Rogan and basically saying, like, Rogan was a guy who was for the people, essentially, and now he's having, like, these billionaires on who just lie to his face, and Rogan's not smart enough to understand that. I don't know if that's true or that's politically biased or whatever. I don't care enough about these issues to have a real debate with you on that. But, like, that's something you can criticize Rogan for. Like, take those clips and be like, hey, this is Rogan just straight up getting lied to. This is a guy you shouldn't really be listening to because he's a dummy. That's perfectly fine. What you're saying is Joe Rogan having Donald Trump on is the downfall of comedy. And that I don't understand. Like, if it meant that suddenly, like, there were other people doing funny stuff that were getting shut down, you might be onto something. But this, again, I know I keep saying it, but it just feels like bitterness that you guys started at the same time. And by the way, this is a guy who had Obama on. Like, let's not forget. Like, Marc Maron interviewed Obama, and you're like, oh, these guys are the downfall of society. I think what it really is Marc Maron had Obama on. It moved the needle for like a week, and then people forgot about it. Whereas Rogan was having these conversations with people, and it led to $200 million for Spotify. And I kind of get being annoyed by that if you're Maron, but it's not like Maron's unsuccessful. And that's where it gets really gross listening to these guys just be like, they have everything, man, and people aren't seeing it. They're not seeing what's right in front of them. No, people have listened to fucking 4 hours of a Joe Rogan podcast. They've decided whether or not they agree with this guy. You know, it's been decided.
This next one's called Teaming Up.
This is, again, it seems like, honestly, I think Jeselnik might have been friends with some or all of these guys at one point. And it seems like he feels like he's not in the in crowd anymore. Like, he's gotten pushed out because of his political beliefs. Because, like, I've watched comedy podcasts and radio shows and all this shit for most of my life, a long time now. And it seems like a pretty welcoming group where you have people of all races, genders, sexual orientations, political beliefs coming together to bust each other's balls. That's what Tough Crowd was, where you had the cast was a super liberal Hispanic guy, a couple liberal black guys, a very far right conservative, Jim Norton and Colin, who are kind of in the middle but lean right. Like, you had these completely opposing viewpoints and ideologies, and yet they would all, like, bust each other's balls and be friends. And now, because of Trump and media coverage and all this stuff over the last 10 years, people have lost their minds like this, where Jeselnik and Maron are like, we can't be friends with these people anymore. They're teaming up against us. And it's just, I don't think it's happening.
Feels like the entire all of what we knew of show business that's sort of been marginalized, and these bigger outlets, like whoever's doing the special, they're just going to glom onto those guys because they don't give a fuck. Mm-hmm. They just want the numbers.
Yes.
So and now, like,
Anthony,
I'm starting.
How dare you say yes? Where is your special? That little upstart Netflix.
Bum, bum.
What are you talking about? How dare Anthony say yes to that? Where, like, oh, these corporations just glom on to these guys. Anthony's special's on Netflix. Like, what are you guys talking about?
I have to fight the urge, or I have to fight I don't know if it's a fear, but that part of the victory lap thing is that, if you think differently, all of a sudden you've got to fight the position of sort of like, I've been beaten.
That's how it's weird to me that to be contradictory towards that group is seen as like a betrayal.
I know,
and not like we're all comedians,
right?
We are all like free thinkers.
Jesus Christ!
But you're saying You're saying they're not comedians. That's the betrayal, Anthony. You said these guys aren't comedians. By the way, I took podcaster out of my bio.
Yes, he
Ooh,
did.
How,
do that, didn't he?
how cool. He bragged to Maron. That might be one of the things that got cut off. He's like, by the way, Mark, I took podcaster out of my bio. Maron's like, nice, man. How rad of you. But like, Anthony went on multiple podcasts, said these guys aren't comedians. And they're now like, why do people think I'm trashing them? We're all comedians, guys. We should be able to joke around. There was no joking in what Anthony did. That's the whole point of this. Like, if he was joking, I would have laughed. I find Anthony Jeselnik funny. There were no jokes here. It was a serious rant about how these guys aren't comics. And now he has the audacity to be like, why do people think like we're going against them, man? I don't get it.
Thinkers.
Sure.
And you go on stage by yourself.
Right.
This whole team up shit
I can't stand it.
couldn't be more lame to me. And I
No
don't
one has a
understand why-
problem with it. No one. Anthony, you've talked about these guys on every podcast you've gone on. I've not heard them once talk about Anthony Jeselnik. I've especially never heard them be like, do you believe Anthony Jeselnik goes on stage without a team? Do you believe he's not one of us? Can you believe Maron and Jeselnik don't have a team behind them? I've never heard them criticize you. Maybe they're doing it privately and I'm not in on it. But it seems like the guy who's mad about people teaming up is you. Like, what? Because these guys are friends and have each other on their podcasts? They're a team now? No. They're all in it for each other. The reason, I've said it before, the reason Hinchcliffe did the Trump rally, the reason he went on that was for one man. And it wasn't Donald Trump. Tony Hinchcliffe did that for Tony Hinchcliffe. And ultimately it worked. Maybe he got more backlash than he realized. And by the way, Tony Hinchcliffe put out a stand-up set about that incident. I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was great. I didn't think it was terrible. I don't think Tony Hinchcliffe is the best comedian. I think he's very far from it. I think he's an okay comic, and his podcast I think is good. So I guess that's ultimately what they're mad at. It's kind of like we used to talk about Rife, and I came to the point where I was like, this is not Matt Rife's fault. Matt Rife is like an okay comic. He's whatever.
He's born with those abs.
Yes. I realized I just didn't get why he was like the biggest comedian in the world. And then the more you listen to Matt Rife, you're like, I don't hate this guy. So maybe that's something like Anthony Jeselnik is going through, where like he's actually mad at the fans or whatever. But it's coming off as like bitterness towards these guys when they've done nothing to you, and you're like, why can't I bust their chops a little bit? What's wrong with what I'm saying? It's like, well, you're ripping apart entirely who they are and what they've accomplished. That's right. Why people are calling it out.
Right. I don't agree with Anthony's first part there, but this teaming up thing, I can understand why institutionalized comedians would understand, or why would they would think that way, because like, oh, we're lone wolves out here, comedians. So you don't team up with other comedians, except you do. Like it happens, Legion of Skanks, every show ever that has a co-host that are funny. You just,
but they always have. Like even back in the day, like comics were fucking Rickles and Newhart were teamed up, I guess, and went on vacations together, and then they talked about it on the Tonight Show. If that's teaming up, then it's been happening forever.
Because Jeselnik talks about the dead babies. He's like, I'm out here alone on this thing. But there's no dead babies, and you're just being a kind of a prick, not being friends with other people, you know?
But also, like, Jeselnik is friends with, he's friends with Mulaney and Kumail Nanjiani and all these guys that, like, he's friends with Maron, you know? Like, you could be friends with comics, and Anthony is. So, like, I don't get the teaming up. It seems like a guy who feels like he's been pushed out of the clique or something. And again, maybe he has. Maybe there's shit that I don't know about where they called Anthony Jeselnik gay and told him to leave, like leave the party. He's not allowed on at the Mothership or something. But
isn't he also Jeselnik an LA comedian? They all left LA, so that might.
So yeah, metaphorically, I guess they did all leave him. Yeah,
yeah.
I have to think it's cool.
Well, but also that's not why we got into it. We got into it because we were asocial fucking weirdos that needed to find our own path. And now it's sort of like, these are my boys. I don't want to be anyone's fucking boy.
Oh, that's so cool, man. Hey, Mark,
Now there
don't
is.
be. Who gives a shit? I don't think anyone's clamoring to hang out with Marc Maron. It's fine.
Sounds
But-
miserable.
But Mark does invite 2 comedians every week into his garage to hang out with him for an hour and talk. And it's usually friendly. Like, even the contentious ones over the years, like Maron kind of tries to be a little like playful and friendly. So like, I don't even get the point of you. Are you supposed to be hostile towards every other comic? I don't get it.
It's friendly, but don't count on funny, because I've been listening now for 6 minutes and I've not laughed.
Right.
Two comedians. This is called The Mothership.
Well, yeah. So this is them just bitching. Like, I guess what Joe Rogan was supposed to do was run an unsuccessful business. That's what he should have done. Instead, he took a different approach, and these guys don't love it.
Oh
And
yeah,
I
that
was
guy.
doing like a couple shows on a Sunday, and I went
Yeah.
over there just for a tour.
Yeah,
And I was like, this place is beautiful. It's
Yeah.
great. It's set up as a great comedy club,
right.
but it's too easy.
Yeah,
You know, it's like you can't fail there.
I could.
They just want to hear like the
Oh
bad
man,
words.
because you're so fucking edgy, Mark. I think it would have been fine. I went to the Mothership. I saw like open mic comics, some that were super liberal. I think you would have been fine, Mark. I think you would have been okay.
What do they mean by you can't fail? Like the room is set up nice and
So-
people are having a good time?
Yeah. So a criticism of the Mothership is that it's always full and the audience is excited to be there. And the reason that's I know, but the reason that's a criticism is like Rogan waxes fantastically about the old days of the Comedy Store and how you really made your bones at 2 a.m. when there were 6 people there, you know, on a Tuesday night or whatever. So their point is like you can't fail. It seemed like Rogan wanted to open a room where like, you know, fucking if Eddie Murphy wanted to make a comeback to stand up, he could really test his material out there and know whether or not it's good. And it's not that. It's a tourist attraction. It's a comedy club that has a lot of cool shows and people want to go to it, and it's hard to get a ticket. That's what it ended up being because Rogan is a big enough name and publicized it so much that it's a tourist spot, basically. But like you're seeing actual comedy shows. So I don't know what Rogan should have done is be like, hey, I'm opening a comedy club. I'm not going to tell anyone where it is because I want it to fail. I guess is
As
what
we
he
all-
should have done.
As we all know, tourists laugh are different. They count for less. 2/3 of a laugh is a
Sure.
tourist laugh.
Sure.
Right.
I'm sure they would be so happy to see you there that you would destroy.
Yeah,
I
Sure,
can't
yes.
imagine Joe Rogan's ever had a bad set
yeah,
at
in
that comedy
place.
club.
That's
Can you
probably true.
imagine a band going into a stadium and be like, you guys, the sound's just too good. I mean, usually our songs sound like garage pieces of crap, but we're just too good. We sound like you two here. Cancel the show.
That's probably true. But like, is he supposed to do a show where it's like, all right, tonight I'm only allowing 6 people who have never heard of me into the building, and I'm going to perform for them. It's like, no, it's a business. You got to pay the fucking staff, so you sell tickets to people who want to go. Like, this is a criticism I don't even get.
Yeah, who goes to comedy club? A lot of tourists go to comedy clubs in New York, Los Angeles. Who do you think your audience is, Jeselnik?
Right. It's the problem with the Comedy Cellar, and I'm sure the Comedy Store now too, where like after I think it's a few different things, but they always say like after Louis used the Comedy Cellar in the intro to his show.
Mhm.
And like, you know, the Opie and Anthony talking about it. So like it became a historic place. So now you can't really fail at the Comedy Cellar. It's not what it used to be. I don't think the owners of the Comedy Cellar are like, fuck. We really messed up now. It's like, no, find a different place to if you're trying to work out material, find a different place to go. If you're trying to make a few bucks, go to the Mothership. What can I tell you?
Yeah, fun fact, Kevin Brennan used to pick up his mail at the Comedy Cellar because he was scared people would know his address. So
Is
that's
that
a fun
right?
fact.
I didn't
Yes.
Because they're happy to be part of the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and so they were just thrilled.
Mm-hmm.
Like the only thing that makes me want to do it is that I have some bits now that are really kind of like they're dark, but they're personal, but they're edgier than anything that those guys could do.
Yes.
Oh
And
man.
I just wonder if I could get them
Oh
into
Mark,
that zone.
Mark, don't do that to us. We're too scared.
Is there a baby? Because I got a guy for you. He's right there. You can teach
Oh,
the
no.
best baby joke.
I bet Mark's gonna talk about Trump. No, not in our house, Mark. Please.
Oh, these guys.
Mark, I think it would go fine. No one, like, they're comedy fans. They would probably laugh. Now, there are people, like, Kirk's talked about this a bunch recently, where, like,
Who?
Kirk Minahan. I'm not sure if you've heard of him.
Never heard.
But he's talked a bunch recently about how, like, now the most sensitive group are Trump supporters. Because if you make a joke about Trump, they go fucking nuts. But that's who Maron should be trying to piss off. Like, comedy, that's not comedy fans. If you went to Skankfest, I'm sure Mark has this image of Skankfest as well, where, like, oh man, if I went there, it'd be so much edgier than anything. This is also talking like a child. So much edgier than anything they've ever seen. I would blow their balls off. They'd lose their minds if they heard me. It's like, no, it would probably kill. like Maron would probably do pretty well there. It's an environment set up to support comedy because they are comedy fans. I've heard people bomb at Skankfest, and it's not because they were liberal. It's because they fucking sucked or just had a bad set. You know, it's not because they were so liberal that the audience couldn't handle it. It was just like, oh yeah, they didn't really bring it today. Not that big a deal. I'm sure you'd be fine, Mark. You know what, Mark? I dare you. Go to the mothership. See if you shock the world. See if you piss everyone off, man. I'm sure it would go fine.
He also kind of set it up perfectly if he did that because, I bombed there. I'm the only person that's ever bombed at the mothership. Look at me. Like, you set it up. So no matter what you do there, you're great. This one's called What Anthony Wants to Do.
This was astonishing to me. I hope this one is timed right, because after all this, after Anthony saying, like, I took a podcaster out of my bio, podcasting's lame, man. This is what I want to do. Again, Maron, being a good interviewer, asks him, so ideally, what would you do with your career? And I couldn't believe that this was Anthony's answer.
Have been like more polite when I showed up there. Everyone was great, but didn't get the job and was so like upset. Not just that I didn't get it, but that I came close.
Yeah.
That I was like, I have to make sure that my next hour is so good that I'm glad I didn't get the job.
And also that you don't have to do anything. That was the big shift, is like, I couldn't understand, like, there were periods there where I'd watch your career.
They're talking about SNL. I hope we have shit.
I think it might have got cut off at the beginning there. He might have said, like, my number one job that I didn't get, that I wanted to get, was SNL.
No, yeah. I'm hoping we have
more.
What I'm looking for, but we'll hear.
I just cut where you told me.
Oh, no, I'm not blaming you. Calm down.
It's Gregor's fault.
And I like the new special. It's great. But, like, there were periods after the talk show, I'm like, what the fuck's he going to do?
Oh, here we go.
But ultimately, you're stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
And you built that audience. So you don't have to fucking do any of that shit anymore.
No.
I mean, is there something you'd want to do?
I really love doing good talk.
Ah, shit. Yeah, that's Spotify just fucks things up. Just a few. So I'll tell you what Anthony wanted to do. He goes, I really love doing good talk. And Mark goes, I don't know what that is. Why don't you explain it to me? He says, well, it's a show where I interview comedians and then we play games. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me, Anthony? A podcast is what you're describing. After all that, that's your greatest dream is to do a podcast, but just on Netflix.
This might be a character. This might be a character by both of them that they're
people
doing.
have suggested that, and I'm not discounting it, but like, if he's doing a character, it is so straight-laced.
Yes.
And so there are no jokes.
No.
It's just to annoy, like, me, I guess. That's the only part. And if he did, it's masterful because it did annoy me. So well played, Anthony.
Just to confound the commentary community. It's just, what was that?
Yes,
We just
yeah.
watched.
But it's like, again, because someone compared it to Norm. Someone in our comments was like, Anthony's a big Norm fan. Maybe he's doing like a Norm type thing. And I was like, well, the big difference was that Norm was funny. And there's nothing like, maybe not everyone understood Norm, but some people did. And this is a thing where it's like, I don't get what the joke is here. He's just bitching constantly about podcasts. But yeah, I couldn't believe that he was like, Yeah, I like what I ideally would want to do is I wish Good Talk got picked up because that was a show where we interviewed we interviewed comedians for a half an hour and then had little games we played. I was like, you got to be shitting me.
We had a little intro. We had some voices. It was some good times.
Yeah, we do a MeUndies ad 20 minutes in, and then
Go to blindmike.net for everything Blind Mike. Look at me. I did it. Krager's did it.